Every house makes its own sound when it breathes alone. The Wexler house whispered. Even now, decades later, I can still hear the creak of wood beneath untouched silverware. The table was set like an altar, the food still warm, though no one was left alive to eat it. That night began with wine and soft laughter, but something in the air had already warned that the final toast would be silent. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the bodies, motionless, slumped over their plates as if waiting for a blessing. I saw their eyes, all open, all empty. It was as if they had died, watching, but watching what? I've never found the right words to explain what I felt walking into that room. I can only say it didn't want to be entered. It felt like a prayer was still echoing in the air, a prayer that refused to end. Since then, every night when I close my eyes, I hear it. I hear the voices. I hear the cutlery. I hear the supper. Still going on. The wall clock read 7:14 p.m. The candles were already lit, even with the electric lights still on. The table was set with fine china, antique silverware, and crystal glasses slightly fogged, as if they held too many memories. The windows were locked, yet the curtains swayed slowly. The smell was roasted meat, apple with cinnamon, and freshly opened wine. A black and white photograph hung crooked on the wall. The 7 members of the Wexler family, still nearly smiling. Just another evening. For anyone passing by too quickly, I didn't pass by quickly. I saw. Mr. Wexler, at the head of the table, wore a dark suit and an empty expression. His wife, across from him, had half-closed eyes and fingers clasped in silent prayer. The 5 children, lined up, wore the same clothes from the photo. All calm, all present. But there was something in the air that the scent of food couldn't mask, a silence thicker than hunger, as if the house itself held its breath, as if it too was waiting for what was coming. There was music. An old vinyl played slowly, and the voice coming from the gramophone sounded wrong, like someone had recorded a lullaby in reverse. The melody scratched at the ears, and still no one moved. No one spoke. I stood there for minutes, frozen in the hallway, before daring to enter. There were no screams, no blood, but something unseen filled every empty space. On the back wall, a large painting showed the same room, the same table, and a similar family, but the faces were blurred, as if someone had smeared their fingers across the paint to erase them. The only clear figure was a man with his back turned, painted to never be recognized. He held something in his hands, something small, something beating. As I looked closer, one detail refused to be ignored. The glasses were full, but the wine inside had thickened like blood, as if the supper had lasted longer than a human body could survive. Yet strangest of all, no insects, no stench of rot, no sign of decay, as if time had frozen that night and the house had shut its eyes. Outside, the trees swayed violently, though there was no wind. I remember thinking, if I go in, I won't come out the same. But it was too late. My feet crossed the threshold on their own, and only then did I realize there was no sound, no echo of my steps, no creak of the floorboards, only the beating of my heart, too loud, too alone, as if the house was listening. At the center of the table, one empty chair, a single plate still covered by a silver dome, as if waiting for someone important, or perhaps someone from outside, a visitor, an 8th seat reserved. And even before I touched it, I knew that chair was meant for me, not because I was invited, but because I was chosen. I sat, not by choice, but by command. And in that moment, the exact instant my fingers touched the napkin, everything changed. The lights went out, but the supper continued. It took 3 days before anyone knocked on the Wexler door. In that village, surrounded by hills and ancient trees, isolation was normal. Entire families could go weeks without seeing each other, even if they lived just a couple 100 meters apart. But there was one thing neighbors always noticed, without fail: the smell of fresh bread. Mrs. Wexler baked every Sunday. That weekend, there was no smell, no bread, no movement, no sound. It was Mrs. Yvette from the house next door who first sensed something was wrong. Her dog had been barking at the Wexler house since Friday night. On Monday morning, when the Wexler children didn't show up at school or anywhere else, she crossed the damp lawn, hesitant, and knocked on the wooden door with the back of her hand. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. The sound echoed inside as if there were a well behind the door. Silence answered back with weight. Local police arrived early that afternoon. 2 officers, neither prepared for what they'd find. The lock wasn't broken, no signs of struggle, and the house was untouched, immaculate. Furniture in place, dishes clean, curtains drawn, a scene frozen in time. But when they opened the dining room door, their world split in half. The 7 Wexlers sat at the table, each in their chair, motionless, their bodies stiff as statues, expressions neutral, eyes open, hands resting near plates or on their laps. They looked alive, but weren't breathing. The most disturbing part wasn't the scene itself, but what was missing. No smell of death, no sign of decay. Their faces still had color, their lips weren't dry. The food on the plates was warm, the wine in the glasses untouched. It was as if everything had happened seconds before the officers arrived, as if they'd walked in during an unfinished ritual. But standing in the doorway, Sergeant Olavo did something he could never explain later. He stepped back twice, pointed at the wall clock, frozen at 7:14 p.m., and whispered, "They knew." The bodies were removed with extreme care. There was something sacred about the scene, as if moving a single object might break a spell or summon something worse. The villagers followed the silent procession without tears, without whispers. Just wide eyes, as if a shadow had fallen over all of them. The house was sealed, but no one dared touch the windows or cover the table. The supper remained untouched for days, weeks, months. The coroner found no clear cause of death, no signs of trauma, poisoning, or organ failure. The bodies appeared dead from absence, as if something had been taken from inside, something invisible, vital, final. And there was one more detail. Each Wexler had a faint circular mark on the back of their neck, like a seal. No cut, no puncture, just a dark spot, perfectly shaped, as if death had touched there, only there. After that, the village fell silent. Neighbors avoided the street. Those who tried listening through the walls came back with headaches, fevers, or relentless nightmares. Some said the candles relit themselves at night. Others swore they saw silhouettes at the table, as if the Wexlers had never left. The police, once calling it a domestic accident, stopped speaking about it. One officer resigned. Another vanished on the road. Mrs. Yvette never opened her curtains again. A week after the incident, she handed over the keys to her house and moved away. She said, "The voices are getting clearer." When asked what voices, she simply replied, "They're still dining, and now they know my name." I.e., in the first few days after the Wexler case broke, the entire country seemed trapped by the same question. How can 7 people die at the same time, without any violence, without an apparent cause, and still remain seated at the table as if waiting for the next course? Newspapers gave it dramatic names: the Last Supper, the Silent Banquet, the Family of Black Wine. But no headline was enough. The truth was heavier than ink, quieter than fear. The first official theory was the most predictable: food poisoning, a mistake in meat preparation perhaps, a rare fungus, an invisible toxin. But lab reports quickly ruled it out. No toxins in the blood, no signs of poison in the food. The bread, the wine, the meat, all within normal standards. No other living organism was affected. Not the animals, not the plants, only the Wexlers, as if death had chosen them. Then came the idea of collective suicide, something planned, perhaps symbolic. The father, a stern man, had ties to obscure religious groups. The mother with a known history of depression, a family pact, a ritualistic farewell. But again, the absence of any foreign substance in their bodies made the theory crumble. And there was one unsettling detail. All the chairs were pushed back, as if each family member had sat down. At the same time, no mess, no hesitation, no sign of prior planning. Some investigators turned toward the possibility of a cult. Mr. Wexler's old journal mentioned vaguely late-night gatherings with the circle of the eighth sound, a phrase no one could interpret. Other notes referred to specific dates, new moons, and strange names scrawled in dark ink along the margins. When a symbolism expert was called in, she refused to go past page 3. She said only, "This isn't fiction, it's invocation." The village had its own ideas, of course. Whispers of ancestral land pacts, spiritual debts, curses left by settlers buried alive. An elder named Jonas claimed the Wexlers had built the house on a wrong place, a field where no one had dared build before. He said that generations ago, people had vanished there, that an old well had been sealed beneath the dining room floor. The police laughed, then stopped laughing. Another theory was psychological: mass hysteria. A collective breakdown caused by isolation, extreme faith, or shared trauma. But no case study pointed to similar behavior across every member of a family. And even if it had, how do you explain the preserved bodies, the warm food, the clock stopped exactly at the hour of their last meal? Some turned to science: electromagnetic fields, radon gas, something seeping up from the ground. A university team brought equipment to the house. Devices malfunctioned. One professor fainted at the threshold. Their final report was brief: total data inconsistency. We recommend full site isolation. The government ignored it. As weeks passed, theories began to fail, and silence started to feel more accurate than any explanation. It felt as though understanding the Wexler case was itself a kind of danger, as if curiosity was a door that shouldn't be opened. Many who got involved, forensic experts, journalists, scholars, began reporting strange symptoms: insomnia, whispering voices, sleep paralysis. All of them described nearly the same dream: an empty chair, a covered plate, and a voice whispering something impossible to repeat. Then came a theory no one wanted to publish, but it spread in deleted recordings, anonymous notes, trembling confessions. The idea that the Wexlers hadn't died, but changed. That the dinner was a ritual, not an ending, a beginning, a kind of passage, and that maybe whatever was seated at that table wasn't entirely human anymore. The diary was found by accident, or so they claimed. During the second sweep of the house, one officer noticed a gap on the bookshelf, as if a book had been pulled moments earlier. When he tapped the back panel, a piece of wood gave way. Inside, wrapped in dark cloth, lay a handmade leather-bound journal, stained at the corner. It looked like wine, or something thicker. On the spine, only one letter: O. No name, no title. As if the diary didn't want to be recognized. The writing was old, looping and full of crossed-out lines. Unlike a normal diary, there were no dates, just moon phases, symbolic drawings, and fragmented text, broken prayers or interrupted thoughts. The early entries were mundane: notes about the garden, the children's health, vague mentions of the wife's condition. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The voice became more intimate and more disturbed. The author, presumably Mr. Wexler, began mentioning voices, first in dreams, then while awake. They speak to me when the house is dark. They are not people, not like us. They promised eternal silence and something beyond hunger. These lines, scattered between religious musings and cryptic poems, formed a slow, horrifying build-up. One passage mentioned an incident with the children. Today, Elisa refused to sit at the table. She said someone was already in her chair, no one visible. Still, we obeyed. From that point, the diary described events never mentioned in any police file or local testimony. On the third night, we all ate in silence. The sound of cutlery disturbed him. We switched to our hands. The word him appears more and more. The diary hints that something had been invited in or summoned, an unnamed entity, but a hungry one. The author refers to it repeatedly as the invisible guest, as if trying to normalize the impossible. He taught us to listen between the sounds. He showed us the door beneath the table. He brought the eighth seat. These lines were examined by linguists and occult specialists. None reached a clear conclusion, but all agreed. It wasn't madness, it was ritual documentation. The second to last page showed carefully drawn circular symbols. Next to them, notes in crude Latin and Aramaic. A partial translation suggested these were not seating plans for people, but for presences. 7 chairs, 7 offerings. The 8th, watches. The final legible line, shaky and smudged, read, "His hunger is not for flesh, it is for time." Then, silence. The last page was torn out. The diary was photographed and sealed, but the original vanished from the police archive a week later. No one admitted to taking it. No one saw who came or went. The security cameras were working, but the footage from that night was corrupted. Only static and a frozen image stopped at exactly 7:14 p.m. The investigator who first read the diary resigned 2 days later. His statement was brief and chilling. "I heard him turn the page." Him? Who? No one knew. But from that moment on, the words time and hunger carried a different weight. It felt as if the diary didn't just describe the events, it extended them. As if, by reading it, someone else joined the table. Some scholars later claimed the diary wasn't just a record, but part of the ritual itself, a kind of link, an extension of the supper, and that perhaps whoever read the last page aloud, unknowingly, was accepting the 8th seat, which might explain why the last page is missing. Everything we know about the ritual comes in fragments. The diary, yes, but also notes hidden in books, scratched symbols beneath the varnish of the table, circular stains that appeared days after the bodies were removed. None of these elements alone would be enough to explain what happened, but together they form a structure, a pattern, as if the house itself had become an organism, and the dinner, at its core, was the heart still beating. The first detail that caught investigators' attention was the floor beneath the central rug. When they finally removed the old floral patterned fabric, they discovered hand-carved circles in the wood, thin, symmetrical markings made with something sharp. 7 circles arranged around an 8th, larger, empty. Inside each, a unique symbol. Crossed between them, Latin phrases that only appeared under candlelight. One repeated often, "Domus Auris," the house of the mouth. The chairs had been placed directly over those symbols, not by chance. Each family member sat above a distinct sigil. A scholar of mystical languages noted that these symbols didn't match any formal tradition. They were new, or too old. Some resembled alchemical seals, others echoed forgotten European grimoires, yet others hinted at indigenous glyphs or pre-Columbian lunar calendars. It was as if the ritual was a collage of forgotten rites, or worse, a ritual reassembled, rewritten, or received. At the center of the table, beneath the covered plate, the one no one dared touch, was a small, dark stone, oval, matte, colder than its surroundings. When it was removed, the room's energy shifted, lights flickered, devices failed. One forensic analyst vomited blood. The stone was taken to a lab. It vanished from a secure refrigerated vault days later. No signs of break-in, just another corrupted camera. At 7:14 p.m., beneath the blurred family portrait, a hidden inscription had been painted over. Adveniat tempus, aperiatur os. Let the time come. Let the mouth open. A prayer or a command. It supported the theory that the dinner was not an isolated act, but the culmination of something longer, older, a cycle long in the making, perhaps years, perhaps generations. The cellar, sealed until then, held more carved symbols in its stone walls, ones not present in the original construction. In the center, a ring of human ash and melted candles. On a small table, 7 childhood portraits. None of them were the Wexler children. Different faces, deep eyes, all unidentified. The dates recorded in books, cross-referenced with lunar phases and local events, pointed to a pattern, a cycle of 28 years, always the same night, always the same date, September 13th, in 1893, in 1921, in 1949, and now, each date marked by disappearances, fires, or unexplained deaths in the region. The Wexlers moved into the house in 1948, meaning they were there for the next round. The diary's words, especially hunger, mouth, and eighth, became symbolic keys. The hunger wasn't physical, it was presence. The mouth wasn't literal, it was a space, a void that needed filling, and the eighth was not just a number, it was the point of imbalance. The ritual needed 7 bodies and 1 center, a channel, a witness. In audio recorded by one analyst during the room's inspection, a background sound appears, one not heard at the time, a deep murmur, repeating, unintelligible but steady. When analyzed as a spectrogram, the waveform reveals a shape, circular, 7 points surrounding an empty center, exactly the floor's pattern, as if the ritual, even after completion, still pulsed in the house's frequencies, and perhaps still pulses. The first report came days after the burial. A 9-year-old boy, son of a caretaker living next door, woke up screaming in the night. He told his mother that the uncles from the big house were singing. When she asked what uncles, he replied with empty eyes, "The ones who are hungry and sitting down." At first, they blamed it on adult gossip, but the next night she heard it too. A low, constant sound, whispered voices in Latin, mixed with the clinking of silverware. The pattern repeated. Even the most skeptical villagers began to report strange occurrences, lights turning on by themselves despite power being cut, wall clocks stopping at exactly 7:14 p.m., wind slipping through sealed windows, carrying a sour smell, somewhere between sulfur and rotting fruit, and above all, the voices, never screaming, never answering, just continuing, like a conversation that never ended. The night guard hired to keep the house under watch lasted 3 shifts. On the 4th, they found him crouched in the attic, hands over his ears, whispering, "They won't stop eating." He had no memory of how he got there. He was institutionalized. To this day, when he sleeps, he grinds his teeth, always at the same hour, always in silence. The local priest tried blessing the house. He came with a cross, holy water, and unshakable faith, entered at 5 p.m., walked out at exactly 7:14 p.m., vomiting blood, eyes watering. He never stepped into a church again. He claimed something watched him from inside the mirrors, said he saw reflections of the dinner table, even from other rooms, and at the table's center, something was breathing. Children avoided the street. Some cried just seeing the house. A visiting mother, unaware of the story, held her infant near the property. The baby turned toward the house and began to laugh, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was mechanical, rhythmic, as if copying a laugh it had heard before. A group of paranormal researchers attempted to document the phenomena. They used sensors, night vision cameras, high-frequency microphones. The footage showed shadows moving between rooms, with no physical presence. A recurring shape appeared in 6 out of 8 cameras, always a figure seated with its back turned, head tilted, holding something in its hands, hard to identify. In one audio recording, a whispered phrase was captured, "The dinner never ended." The neighborhood began to avoid the street. Homes nearby were sold one by one, but no one stayed. The pattern repeated, clinking dishes at night, lights flickering at 7:14, sudden cold drafts, and the presence. Everyone described it. Heavy, motionless, silent, but watching, as if something was still waiting. Some claimed the ritual hadn't failed, it had simply been paused, as if time had been interrupted but not undone, that the voices were echoes of what happened, or what still needed to happen, and that as long as the house remained standing, it would remember, like a body holding its final breath. The most common sound reported near the house is cutlery on porcelain, always rhythmic, always in tempo, as if 7 people still chewed in silence, but the most sensitive claimed to hear something else, an 8th sound, deep, low, coming from beneath the floor, a sound that isn't chewing, it's waiting. And as the voices continue, one question grows among the villagers. If the dinner never ended, is it still sending invitations? His name was Samuel Costa, investigative journalist, a skeptic, known for debunking hoaxes and dismantling urban myths with the precision of someone who only believed in what could be touched. When he first heard about the Wexler case, he laughed, thought it was just small-town hysteria, a cover story for a more mundane tragedy. But something, pride, maybe curiosity, drew him in, and after that, no one could pull him away. Samuel rented a house near the Wexler property and began his personal investigation. He spent days reading files, interviewing locals, and nights watching the house in silence, writing everything down. Said he was collecting contradictions, planning to dismantle the lie piece by piece. But over time, his tone shifted. The neat notes in his notebooks turned to frantic scribbles, endless repetitions, words crossed out like something inside him was trying to silence his hand. The first sign something was wrong came quietly. He stopped eating, said he felt nauseous, that the smell of the dinner followed him even outside the house. He started hearing sounds at night, not from the Wexler home, but inside his own, light footsteps, a dripping tap, always in the same rhythm, and voices from inside his cupboards. Voices saying his name, voices that invited. He decided he had to enter the house. Officially, it was sealed, but Samuel found a way in through the cellar. He brought a camera, a recorder, and a flashlight. At 6:47 p.m., he sent a voice message to his editor, "I'm going in. If I don't come out, don't follow the sound." He was never seen again. What we know comes only from the objects found days later, laid out neatly on the Wexler dining table. His camera, his recorder, his notebook. The camera was empty, battery completely drained, despite being fully charged. The recorder had only one file, 28 seconds long. The audio begins with a door closing and Samuel taking a deep breath. Then the sound of a chair being pulled back. Silence. Then a deep whisper. "Now we are 8. That's where it ends. But the notebook is what truly shook the team. Samuel had filled over 40 pages with a single symbol, the same carved beneath the table, the 8th circle, all drawn by hand, obsessively precise. In some pages, the same phrases repeated hundreds of times. His hunger is time, and if I write, he eats less. It felt more like containment, or a delay. After that event, the house was sealed again. But not everyone respected the barrier. A documentary crew tried to retrace Samuel's steps. 3 members quit the first night, reporting anxiety attacks and auditory hallucinations. The 4th, the director, vanished on the 2nd day. His car was found on the roadside, engine running, door ajar. On the passenger seat, a single sheet of paper, drawn in what looked like dried blood, the same circular symbol. Samuel's editor had all his notebooks and materials bound and locked in a vault. Months later, she was institutionalized after a delusional episode, said she heard voices every day at 7:14 p.m. whispering, "You know where he is." In her journal, one phrase repeated over and over, "The dinner never ended." The dinner never ended. The dinner. Researchers who analyzed Samuel's final recording found a background sound imperceptible to the human ear, a vibrational frequency that caused minor arrhythmia and nausea. One expert claimed the sound was learning, adapting, trying to speak in the voice of its next listener. That's when the focus of the investigation shifted. It was no longer about what happened to the Wexlers. The question now was, who's next to sit down? The first link to the past came from an almost invisible detail, a carved mark on the central beam of the house, discovered decades before the Wexler case during a routine restoration. A circular symbol divided into 8 parts. At the time, it was dismissed as folk decoration. But after the same symbol appeared in Samuel's notebooks, in the recordings, and in children's drawings around the village, it was treated as a sign, a seal, a warning left by someone who already knew. Local researchers dug into the property's land records. They found the land had changed owners 17 times since 1792, an absurd number for the region. Most previous residents either vanished, sold in haste, or died mysteriously. In early documents, one phrase appeared again and again: land that breathes from beneath. A metaphor, or something more literal. The earliest written account dates back to the colonial era. A letter from a Portuguese friar, dated 1741, mentions building a small oratory on a hilltop to contain the murmurs rising from the ground. At night, the friars reported voices in unknown tongues and lights dancing around the altar. The oratory burned down under mysterious circumstances. Its scorched remains now sit directly beneath the Wexler dining room. Maps of the region show the area was avoided by indigenous communities. A Krenak elder, consulted anonymously in the 1980s, described it as a bleeding point of the earth. He said his ancestors buried something there that must never be moved, something faceless, nameless, but hungry, and that anything built on that land would become an offering, whether the builder knew it or not. Other documents show that in the late 1800s, a German settler tried to found a village on the exact site. The project was abandoned after a string of tragedies: spontaneous fires, fevers, disappearances. In his journal he wrote, "The night here has teeth." No further attempts were made to settle the land until the Wexlers arrived. It seems the family didn't know the full extent of the curse, but the father, Jonathan Wexler, had a fascination with ancient symbolism. He corresponded with European occultists and kept a private library of banned books. He believed certain places communicated with time, that there were locations where the present and past overlapped, and that on specific nights, the hunger of the ground meets the hunger of man. Curiously, the surname Wexler appears in another document, a Vatican Inquisition archive from 1821. A man named Elias Wexler was tried for passage rituals involving silent dinners, circular symbols, and fasting children. Condemned to burn, his final words were, "7 are enough, but the 8th comes from within." No mention of children, no known descendants, but the name resurfaced. Others link the site to a forgotten massacre. In 1865, several families were executed for heresy. They reportedly held secret feasts under new moons. Official records say nothing was found, but elders spoke of a cult, the stone mouth, that promised eternal life in exchange for time. Layer by layer, the past doesn't reveal itself as backstory, but as origin. The house wasn't chosen. The family didn't die by accident, and the ritual may never have been invented. Perhaps it's just reappearing, like a cyclical fever, a call echoing across generations, as if the land can't go ignored for too long, as if it opens its mouth and waits for the next feast. Authorities closed the case, that's what they said. The cause of death was listed as sudden multi-system failure, a pretty name for the unknown. The file was archived, the news moved on, but those who saw the scene, who entered the house, even briefly, knew this wasn't an ending. It was a pause, because some things don't obey time, and the Wexler house was still there, watching. The bodies preserved in the lab continued to baffle scientists. Months after death, there were no signs of decomposition. Skin remained elastic, hair kept growing, nails too. Some reports noted a shift in eye color, a duller shade, but with a reactive gleam, a gleam that responded to light. One analyst, alone in the chamber, claimed to see Elisa Wexler blink. He was removed for emotional instability, but before leaving, he left a note. They're still dining, just inward now. The food taken from the table, sealed in sterile capsules, also refused to rot. No mold, no insects. The meat, the bread, even the wine remained untouched. One study revealed something unique in the wine. The The fermentation seemed to be reversing, as if the liquid was getting fresher over time, as if something inside it refused to age. Attempts to reconstruct the family's final days hit the same wall. There was no decline, no transition. Every account said the same: healthy, normal, reserved. And then, from one day to the next, absolute silence, as if they had vanished from the inside first, as if the emptiness had begun within. Photographs of the house over the months showed another eerie trend. Objects shifted. Vases once full now stood empty. Curtains that were closed were now open. A portrait had been turned to face the wall. No sign of forced entry. No movement caught on tape. But the object seemed to know someone was, or would be, there. The dining room clock, the one stopped at 7:14 p.m., was taken for testing. The mechanics were perfect, the gears clean, but when wound, the minute hand trembled, resisting. After a few seconds, the clock would reset itself, back to 7:14, always. As if time in the house wasn't broken, but restrained. Thermal scans revealed cold zones around the dining table. Even on hot days, the temperature there was 4 degrees below average. One technician joked, "It's like it's waiting for the plates to be refilled." No one laughed. In a final attempt to rationalize things, a group of skeptics recreated the scene in a lab. Table, chairs, food, temperature, everything identical. Cameras rolled for 72 hours. Nothing happened, except for one detail. At exactly 7:14 on the third day, the audio picked up a faint sound, clear but soft, a whisper that said, "Not here." The mystery persists not just for lack of explanation, but because every attempt to explain it seems to feed it, as if the investigation itself was nourishment, as if doubt kept the ritual alive, even without the bodies. Perhaps that's why everything in the house remains untouched. The table set, the covered dish, the empty chair. And the final question, never answered: what lay beneath that silver dome? Years have passed since the night the Wexlers went silent. The house remains untouched, avoided. There are fences around it, but no fence stops the sound. No one enters, yet sometimes someone hears. A quiet prayer, a glass clinking, a whisper saying it's time. Time for what? No one knows, or maybe no one wants to. Time tried to move on. Weeds grew. The road was rerouted. The story faded into podcasts, forums, sensational documentaries. But something remained, a weight in the village air, an absence heavier than presence, a space still avoided, even by non-believers, even by those who swear it's fiction. One night, a child vanished during a game of hide-and-seek. 3 minutes. When she returned, pale, she said she hid in the chair that glows. She described the dining room perfectly. She had never entered the house, never seen photos, yet she named the plates, the faces, and told her mother, "They're waiting for you, Mommy. There's just one seat left." A researcher in an unpublished paper claimed the Wexler case isn't unique. He found similar reports worldwide, always a variation of the same pattern: 7 people, 1 empty seat, an unfinished meal. He called it the incomplete supper pattern, believed it wasn't an isolated ritual, but a recurring entity, something that feeds on time, attention, doubt, and that the Wexler house was simply one manifestation. The covered dish, still untouched, remains. No one has lifted it. No one wants to know what's beneath the silver dome. One priest said, "It's a living metaphor, the ritual's body, its womb, and that if we uncover it, we won't find food. We'll find the next step, because maybe the dinner didn't end. Maybe it was never just dinner. Maybe the ritual didn't fail. It paused, suspended, waiting for the right moment, the right name, the right guest. The 8th, the one who hasn't arrived, or the one who hasn't realized they're already seated." Clocks still stop at 7:14 p.m. Even now, even in new homes, even far from the village. People who hear the story feel nausea at that hour. Others report that when they close their eyes, they see the table set, as if remembering is enough to awaken something. as if telling the story is an invitation. And what if it is? What if every person who listens, who watches, who comments, likes or shares is taking a seat? Maybe that's what keeps the ritual alive. The memory, the curiosity, the echo. The chair is still empty. The dish is still covered. Time is still stuck. And the house just needs one more. Now that you've watched all the way to the end, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Leave a like if this story sent chills down your spine. And share it with someone who would love to uncover this mystery. But remember, if you dream of the table being set, don't sit down.